The ad was simple, but the visitors were not. Raynor lived alone on the edge of planet Turn 6. The land was wild and empty, filled with red soil, tall grass, and silence. He didn't mind the silence. In fact, he liked it. After the Orion War, he had enough of people, noise, and lies. He had a small farm built from scrap. Solar panels powered his tools. An old droid helped with small tasks. But the work was getting hard. He needed help. Just someone strong enough to lift, carry, and plant. So he posted a job ad on the Intercolony network. Farm help needed. Any species welcome. Food and pay provided. Simple, honest, nothing fancy. He expected replies in a few weeks, maybe. Turn 6 wasn't popular, and his farm was too far from any trade line. But the next morning, something strange happened. A ship landed. Not a delivery drone, not a work shuttle. A long, narrow ship with dark metal skin. It made no sound when it landed, no lights, no signal. Raynor stood outside with a plasma wrench in hand. Just in case. The ship door opened. Smoke rolled out, thick and gray. 5 tall figures stepped down. They wore dark cloaks that dragged in the dust. Raynor narrowed his eyes. They weren't human. Their skin was pale blue, with faint glowing lines across their faces. Their eyes were large, silver, and tired. The tallest one spoke first. Her voice was soft but firm. "We saw your message, we came." Raynor looked confused. "You're here for farm work?" he asked. They all nodded slowly. Then the smallest one stepped forward and said, "We are all widows, and we are all being hunted." The air felt colder suddenly. Raynor lowered his wrench. He didn't know what to say. These weren't simple travelers. They were running from something or someone. He could see pain in their eyes. Not fear of hard work, but fear of being found. "Who's hunting you?" Raynor asked. They looked at each other. Then the leader said, "A hunter who leaves no witnesses." Raynor didn't like drama, but he also didn't turn away people in need. He sighed. "You get one night," he said. "Food, shelter, and if nothing burns down, maybe a second." They nodded in thanks and followed him into the farmhouse. That night was quiet, too quiet. The stars above Turn 6 looked normal, but Raynor felt something was off. The alien women didn't sleep. They sat in corners, whispered in a strange language. One of them, youngest among them, stood outside all night. She looked at the sky and whispered like she was calling to someone. Raynor watched her from his window. His old war instincts kicked in. He knew the signs of someone waiting for a signal, or giving one. His farm droid picked up something odd at midnight. A pulse, a signal, bouncing off his comm tower. It wasn't local. It came from orbit. Raynor grabbed his old battle tablet. The signal was encrypted in a dead language from the war. He didn't like that. By morning, strange things had happened. His animals were restless. One of the storage units was open. The crops had black marks burned into them. And near the barn, in the soft soil, he found a message, scratched deep into the ground in alien script. He ran a scan, translated the letters. "They are not what they seem." Raynor stared at the message. His heart beat faster. Was someone warning him? Or was this part of a trap? He walked back to the house slowly. Inside, the women were silent. Calm, like nothing had happened. But Raynor had seen war. He knew when something was wrong. And now, he had 5 strangers under his roof, with secrets too big to hide for long. The widows don't sleep. Raynor didn't sleep much that night. Too many questions in his mind. Too many strange signs. He sat at the edge of his bed, looking at the burned message in his tablet. They are not what they seem. Someone, or something, had come close to his farm without setting off any alarms. That meant tech he couldn't detect. Or something worse, something old. By morning, the 5 widows were already moving around the farm. They hadn't touched the guest beds. They didn't even look tired. They had simply waited for sunrise. Raynor stepped outside with a mug of hot kava in hand. The youngest widow stood near the garden, touching the soil. Her hands glowed faintly where they touched the dirt. It made the crops rise half an inch, instantly. Raynor froze. "Are you using biotech?" he asked. She looked up and gave a small smile. "No, just memory." He didn't understand. And she didn't explain. The others were quiet too. No small talk, no laughter. They worked like machines, fast, careful, silent. By midday, half the field was done. More progress than Raynor had made in a week. Still, his nerves stayed sharp. Their speed, their precision, it didn't feel like farm labor. It felt like soldiers on a mission. Later that afternoon, he noticed something strange again. His security drone was offline. He checked the logs. It had been disabled exactly 23 minutes after the women arrived. No damage, no error. Just off. That's not something that happens by mistake. Raynor walked back to the house slowly. Inside, the leader, the tall one with silver veins on her neck, was waiting in the kitchen. She looked at him and said, "There's something you should know." Raynor tensed. "What?" She spoke clearly, calmly. "You asked for workers. But you may have found something else." Raynor raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" She stepped closer. Her eyes shimmered like glass under sunlight. "Like war refugees who were never supposed to survive." Raynor didn't reply. He knew better than to speak too fast. She continued, "Our husbands were part of Project Knox. It was erased from all records. We were erased too." Raynor's blood turned cold. He remembered that name, Project Knox. A Black Ops science experiment during the Orion War. Off the books, too dangerous to talk about. "You were part of that?" he asked. "No," she said. "We were the result." Just then, something outside cracked. Loud and sharp, like metal splitting. Raynor rushed out. The barn door was half torn open. Inside, his emergency pod was glowing and shaking. The youngest widow stood near it, her hands raised. Something inside the pod was knocking. She turned to Raynor and said, "It followed us here." Raynor stared at the pod. Inside, something moved. Something large. And breathing. The thing in the pod was not alone. The emergency pod shook again. This time harder. Dust fell from the barn ceiling. Raynor gripped the side of the door, watching as the youngest widow stood calm. Her hands were still raised, but her eyes were closed. The others arrived fast. No panic, no shouting. Just that same cold silence. The leader walked up beside Raynor. "We didn't open it," she said. "It woke on its own." Raynor glanced at the control panel. The screen was cracked, blinking red. This pod hadn't been touched in years. It was supposed to stay locked, sealed after the war ended. No power, no signal, no life. But now something inside was breathing. Raynor stepped closer. He tapped the panel. The display glitched, then showed a name. Subject, Aonox 7. He stepped back slowly. He knew that name. Aonox, advanced organism, part of a banned bioweapons unit. Illegal, unstable, and officially destroyed. "You brought a war beast to my farm," Raynor said. The leader didn't blink. "No," she said. "You did." Raynor stared at her. "What do you mean?" "You don't remember," she said. "Because they wiped your mind." Raynor shook his head. That was impossible. He was a soldier, not a lab rat. "You served in the outer moons," she said. "Unit 9X3. Raynor froze. That number, he hadn't heard it in years. And he never told anyone. Not even the system AI. "You helped move the pods," she continued. "Before they were destroyed." Raynor stepped back. "No," he said. "That was classified, red level." "And yet, here it is," she said, pointing at the pod. The youngest widow opened her eyes. The pod stopped shaking. Inside, the breathing slowed. She turned to Raynor and said, "It's not awake yet. But something else is." They all looked up. A sound echoed across the sky. A deep hum. Low, steady, unnatural. Raynor rushed outside. Above the clouds, something was coming. Not fast, but big. Too big. His farm scanner kicked in, flashing a warning. Massive heat signature detected. Approach vector. Unknown. The widows stood in a line now, side by side, facing the sky. They didn't look afraid. They looked ready. "What is that?" Raynor asked. The leader answered without turning her head. "It's the collector." Raynor's mouth went dry. He'd heard rumors. A rogue machine from the war, built to clean battlefields by removing anything alive. Man, alien, or otherwise. "You brought it here," he said. "No," she replied. "It followed the signal." Raynor looked at the barn. The pod was the signal. And the signal had been sleeping on his land for years. "You had all this time," he said. "Why now?" The youngest widow turned to him and said, "Because you're the last piece. Without you, it can't complete the cycle." "What cycle?" Raynor asked. But no one answered. Above them, the sky cracked open. Not with light, but with silence. The kind of silence that kills sound, breath, and thought. The collector had arrived. He wasn't just a farmer. The collector hovered above the clouds. It didn't roar or shine. It just waited. A black circle against the silver sky. Raynor stood frozen in the dirt. his eyes on the machine above, his hands shaking, not from fear, but from something deeper. Memory. The widows stood behind him, silent. The youngest stepped forward and touched his shoulder. "You don't remember who you really are," she said. Raynor laughed, bitter, short. "I'm a farmer," he said. "I plant, I fix, I sleep." She looked him in the eye. "No," she whispered. "You're the reason the collector was born." Flashback, 12 years ago. He was younger, wearing black armor. His hands were bloodied, not from war, from choices. He stood in a cold lab. A woman screamed behind glass. Not from pain, from transformation. Raynor watched her change into something else. Not human, not alien, but a blend, a weapon. Beside him, a voice said, "We'll make widows of them all." He didn't respond. He just pressed a button, and the glass filled with gas. Back to now. Raynor fell to his knees, his head in his hands. "I was part of it," he whispered. "I helped build the program." The leader of the widows walked forward. Her eyes were glowing now. "You were our judge," she said, "and now you are our witness." Above them, the collector moved. Not toward them, toward the barn. Raynor stood up. "If it gets the pod, what happens?" The youngest answered, "It wakes all the others. Every sleeping weapon, every dead project, every failed idea." Raynor clenched his fists. "This isn't about hiding anymore. This is about stopping it." The leader nodded once. "You remember now." Raynor turned and ran into his house. He moved fast, not like a farmer, like a soldier. He lifted a floor panel, pulled out a black case. Inside was a weapon no one should have kept. Illegal, old, unstable, but powerful. A pulse cannon from the Orion vaults. Still hot after all these years. He looked at it for 1 second. Then he said, "I built the nightmare. Maybe I get to end it too." One of them lied. Raynor stepped out of the house with the pulse cannon in hand. It felt heavier than he remembered. Not because of weight, because of what it meant. The widows stood still, watching the sky. The collector was descending now. Slow, steady, silent. Like death wearing a machine's face. Raynor walked past them and toward the barn. The youngest widow followed. She walked like she had done this before. "You said it followed you," Raynor said. "But the signal was here for years." She nodded. "We tried to stay away. But when your ad went live, we knew it had activated." Raynor looked at the barn. The pod inside glowed red. Not from heat, from memory. It was remembering war. He raised the cannon. "Then let's end it now," he said. But before he could fire, the leader of the widows grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said. "There's something you don't know." Raynor looked at her, confused. "You said we had no time." She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "One of us was not made like the others." Raynor's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" The other widows turned slowly. Now there was tension between them. Not fear, distrust. The leader pointed at the youngest. "She's not a widow," she said. "She never lost anyone." The youngest stepped back, her face calm, but her eyes bright with energy. "You knew?" she said softly. "You all knew and stayed silent." Raynor raised the cannon again. "What is she?" The leader answered. "She's not running from the collector. She's controlling it." Flashback. Inside the pod, years ago. A small girl, alone, locked in a tube. Grown in silence, fed code and fear. Taught only one purpose. Survive and return. "You were the final key," the leader said. "You never escaped the lab. You are the lab." The youngest's hands began to glow. The same color as the collector's eyes in the sky. She smiled. "I didn't lie," she said. "I begged for shelter. You just didn't ask from what." Raynor turned and fired. The cannon blast hit the barn. The pod exploded in blue fire. But the shockwave didn't stop the collector. It sped up, now racing toward them, no longer calm. "You triggered it," the leader shouted. Raynor stared at the youngest. "You brought this," he said. "You wanted this." She looked up at the falling death machine and whispered, "I was never alone." The girl was never meant to survive. The sky split open. The collector dropped like a black sun. No engines, no flame, just gravity and hunger. Raynor stood frozen, not because he was afraid, but because he finally understood. Everything he had tried to forget was coming home. The youngest widow, the one who had smiled, begged, whispered to the wind, now stood with arms wide open. Her body glowed, brighter than before. Lines of ancient code lit up across her skin. "You said you were hunted," Raynor said. She smiled sadly. "I was, but now I'm done running." The other widows moved quickly. They formed a shield around Raynor, their bodies glowing with blue energy. "She's not one of us anymore," the leader said. "She's the core." The collector screamed, not with sound, but with pressure. Air vanished, dirt cracked, time itself seemed to stutter. The youngest walked toward it. "Calm, almost gentle. You built me to control the war," she said. "And then you left me behind." Raynor's pulse cannon powered up. He aimed, but his hands shook. "You're just a kid," he said. "No," she whispered. "I'm every mistake your kind made." Then she raised her hand, and the collector stopped midair, just floating, waiting. The wind died. The world paused. The other widows screamed in unison. "She's taking command." Raynor's comlink buzzed. A hidden frequency cut through. An old voice from the war. "Command override still possible. But you'll have to burn her out from the inside." Raynor stared at her. At the girl who had asked for shelter, food, mercy, and he had given it. She had smiled, cried, even planted his crops. And now she was about to restart the war. He looked at the other widows. They were holding the energy field together, trying to block her signal. But it was cracking. He only had one shot. One chance to stop the signal from syncing with the collector. If she completed the merge, nothing would be left of her. Or them. Or him. Raynor whispered. "I'm sorry." He fired. The beam struck her directly in the chest. But she didn't scream. She just looked at him. Not with hate, but with peace. "Thank you," she said. Then everything exploded. The seeds of war were buried in his hands. The light faded. The ground was scorched. The sky was empty again. Smoke rose from what used to be the barn. The collector was gone. Not destroyed. Erased. Raynor stood in the ash. Pulse cannon melted in his hands. Armor cracked, lungs burning. But he was alive. So were the widows, 4 of them. Barely. The youngest was gone. Nothing left but black dust where she had stood. No body, no blood. Just silence. Raynor dropped to his knees. He didn't cry. He had no tears left. "Was it enough?" he asked. The leader stepped forward, her steps slow. "Yes," she said. "She broke the link before you fired." Raynor stared at the ground. "You mean she saved us?" "She saved you," the leader said. "She saved you from becoming the man you were." Raynor shook his head. "I still pulled the trigger." The leader looked up at the sky. Sometimes pulling the trigger isn't the sin. Sometimes it's waiting too long to see who's holding the weapon. They stood in silence for a while. Then one of the other widows said, "What now?" Raynor looked at his farm. The soil was ruined, the tech was fried. But the crops she touched were still standing. Still green. Still growing. He walked to the edge of the field and knelt. He touched the earth where her hands had been. It was warm, alive. "She gave something back," he whispered. "Even after all that." The leader stepped beside him. That's what they never understood. Humanity doesn't survive because of power. It survives because it learns. Raynor stood. He looked at the remaining widows. "You can stay if you want," he said. "I don't have much. But I have soil." One by one, they nodded. Not because they needed shelter, but because they needed something else. A place to remember. As the sun rose again over turn 6, Raynor turned the old soil with his bare hands. He planted new seeds. Not just for food, but for peace. The girl who wasn't a widow had left him something more than survival. She had left him a reason to start again.